Welcome, everyone, to Rutgers at the Voice of College Football, where today we are going to discuss the upcoming game against the Michigan State Spartans, and we are going to discuss the upcoming playoff rankings. So, and the link to the show is in the chat if you want to call in. And if you like the show, hit that like and subscribe button. So Rutgers coming off of a very difficult loss against the Illini of Illinois. 4th and 13 with 40 seconds left. Rutgers has the game won. Illinois throws a 40-yard touchdown pass with 4 seconds left to win the game and to take Rutgers to 6-5 on the season. Very heartbreaking loss, similar to the losses against UCLA 35-32. It seems really, and Nebraska 14-7. It seems like it's a long ways away from that 21-18 victory over Washington in Piscataway months ago. So, last game of the season for Rutgers. Rutgers comes in 6-5 overall, 3-5 in the Big Ten. Michigan State 5-6, 3-5 in the Big Ten. The game is in East Lansing, where Michigan State is 4-2 at home. So, where are we? Well, we're really at a point where, and I see Jillian Baker in the comment section. Hi, Jillian. We're really at an inflection point. We're looking at a season wondering what could have been. How many more wins should Rutgers have had, and how good could they have been? Injuries really decimated this team, and close losses at Nebraska, 14-7 in Lincoln, 35-32 against UCLA in Piscataway, and an inexplicable 42-10 loss to Wisconsin in Piscataway. Rutgers could be a 9 or 10 win team. Unfortunately, things did not go their way this year. The little things hurt them, the injuries hurt them, and now we're looking at a season that's going to end up either 6-6 or 7-5 with Rutgers going to a bowl. But certainly, everyone's expecting and hoping for a 7-5 season. So let's look at the Michigan State Spartans. Like I said, 5-6 overall, 3-5 in the Big Ten. They began the season against Florida Atlantic with a victory 16-10. Then they defeated a fairly good Maryland team 27-24. They defeated Prairie View 40-0 to go to 3-0 on the season. Then they went on a 3-game losing streak, similar to the 4-game losing streak that Rutgers went on after being 4-0. Lost to Boston College 23-19. Ohio State defeats them 38-7. Oregon defeats them 31-10. Michigan State bounces back with a win over Iowa 32-20. Then a 7-point loss to Michigan 24-17. A 37-point defeat to the Indiana Hoosiers, who just fell to the Ohio State Buckeyes 38-15 in Columbus. Then a loss 38-16 against Illinois, and a victory against Purdue 24-17. So this Michigan State team is 5-6. Are they good? They're not great. But in East Lansing, they're 4-2. And this is going to present a challenge for Rutgers and a fan base that desperately wants them to get to at least 7 wins and a respectable season. So let's talk about the players for Michigan State. Quarterback Aiden Childs, who Rutgers recruited. Thus far this year, 179 out of 300 for 2,265 yards. 59.7% completion rate, 12 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. The running backs, K'Ron Lynch-Adams, 124 carries for 580 yards for a 4.7 yards per carry average and 2 touchdowns. Nate Carter, 109 carries for 452 yards, a 4.1 yards per carry average, and 4 touchdowns. And Aiden Childs, a dual-threat quarterback, 93 carries for 236 yards for a 2.5 yards per carry average and 3 touchdowns. How about those wide receivers for Michigan State? They've got a pretty good group. Nick Marsh, 39 receptions for 636 yards and 3 touchdowns. Monterey Foster Jr., 46 receptions for 588 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Jack Velling, the tight end for the Spartans, 31 receptions for 334 yards. On the defensive side, linebacker Jordan Turner, 60 tackles and 2 interceptions. Linebacker Cal Halliday, 52 tackles. And defensive back Nikai Martinez, 47 tackles with 2 interceptions. So we come yet to another pivotal game for Rutgers. Let's take this in context. Rutgers came into the season with a very strong defense and a promising offense led by Ethan Kaliakamanis and Don Bosco prep graduate Kyle Monangai, and got off to one of the best starts it has in years at 4-0, including a 21-18 victory over the Washington Huskies in Piscataway. But then injuries piled up, particularly on the defensive side, and then began a 4-game losing streak. Rutgers losing to UCLA 35-32, Wisconsin 42-10, USC 42-20, and Nebraska 14-7. 2 of those games were winnable games, especially UCLA and Nebraska. And then Nebraska goes on a 2-game winning streak to go to 6-4. Potential to go to 8-4 on the season if they defeat Illinois and Piscataway and Michigan State and East Lansing. What happens? A heartbreaking loss to Illinois. Rutgers was in the lead for most of the game, was up 24-15 early in the fourth quarter, at which point they were outscored by the Illini 23-7 for the rest of the game. And the last score was heartbreaking. With just 14 seconds left, the Illini sent out their field goal kicker to win the game from 58 yards out. He kicks, and it's no good. So a win for Rutgers. Right? Wrong. Coach Schiano called a timeout just before the kick to ice the kicker. Now, I'm not faulting Coach Schiano. Coaches do that. Whether he should have done it on a 58-yard attempt, I'm not sure, but he's not the reason for the loss. But the kick is wide left, but since Schiano calls a timeout, Illinois gets second life. And they decide not to go for the field goal, and instead, on a 4th and 13, with 40 seconds left, Luke Altmaier completes a 20-yard pass that is then run into the end zone, and Rutgers loses. It was the most heartbreaking loss of the season, bringing Rutgers to 6-5, 3-5 in the Big Ten, and really a microcosm of what has happened this season. Rutgers could have been so much better, should have been so much better. The injuries really did hurt them. And just not being able to get the job done, because so many times games are decided by a few plays. And each time against UCLA, against Nebraska, when they had the ball 1st and goal from the 2 and couldn't get in with Monangai, when they had Illinois 4th and 13 with 40 seconds left, when there were 3 points within striking distance of UCLA, those few plays ultimately led to 3 losses and a season that at 6-5 really could have been much, much better and should have been much, much better. But that does not mean the future for Rutgers is not bright. It just means that this year, while there were strides made, and there was progress made, it still is a disappointment. So what did Coach Schiano have to say at his press conference about the upcoming game and the season in general? Well, he expressed the sentiment that really any Rutgers fan would express. It's a painful loss, but he said that the team has learned from it and the team has moved on. Calls Aiden Childs a tremendous athlete and Michigan State a very good football team in which they will have their hands full in East Lansing, and I believe that they will. He said it's going to be a huge challenge going on the road to East Lansing. And not surprisingly, I mean, Michigan State is 4-2 at home. And Michigan State only lost to Michigan by 7 and did defeat a Maryland team that defeated USC. So this is not this is going to be a pretty good team and a challenge for the Scarlet Knights. But Coach Schiano emphasized, as he always does, that chop is a way of life at Rutgers, that they have to keep chopping, they have to keep persevering, keep overcoming adversity, not make excuses, and go out on the field and get those victories. Because at the end of the day, what really matters is wins and losses. And although Rutgers has put forth a fantastic effort this year, Kyle Monangai has been wonderful for Rutgers. Ethan Kaliakmakis has made great strides. The defense at times has been excellent. They just haven't been able to do the little things, win those few plays, and get the victory when it was within their grasp. As Schiano said during his press conference, if you don't win, doesn't matter. Winning isn't everything, but as Vince Lombardi said, it's the only thing. Schiano did allude to the injuries, and quite frankly, his mood today, a few days ago during the press conference, was very somber. You could tell that Schiano was thinking about how good this season could have been and should have been had they not suffered those injuries, but also had they not lost out on those plays. That 4th and 13, if they had just held them, even if they gave up a first down, if they didn't allow a touchdown pass, 3 points away from beating UCLA and Piscataway. A 1st and goal on the 2 against Nebraska, and they can't punch it in. So they hold Nebraska to 14 points, but can't score more than 7. The little things cumulatively piled up to lead to 3 losses that really should have never happened. Rutgers should be in contention for a playoff spot right now. And unfortunately, as it stands, they're only in contention for a mediocre bowl game. And that's why you see Schiano with the mood he had in that press conference. And there will be regret looking back on this season. But as Schiano said, hopefully Rutgers will learn from it. Hopefully their recruiting will bolster the depth of the team, because what Rutgers needs is depth, because they don't have it. They need depth. They need a championship culture where the expectations are complete for a playoff every year. They need to recruit by buying players in the portal and out of high school. And they need to create a culture that develops players so that they can tell recruits, not only will you be financially secure when you go to Rutgers, not only will you get a top-notch education, not only will you win, but life after Rutgers will be better than life before Rutgers, because you're going to compete for a spot in the NFL. And in your life after football, your education and experience at Rutgers will benefit you. That takes money and that takes commitment, and that's what we need from Rutgers if they're going to take that next step. So, Michigan State's not a great team, but in East Lansing, they are a better team. And in East Lansing, as I previously stated, they are 4-2. Now, let's look at some of their key victories. A good Iowa team with Caleb Johnson, one of the best running backs in the nation. They beat by 12, 32-20. Only lost by 7 to a Michigan team this year that probably has similar regrets, because they have a great defense, but they just didn't have a quarterback. And that's really what spelled doom for Michigan. Defeated a bad Purdue team, but did defeat a Maryland team that, like I said, defeated USC, and ultimately proved competitive in most of their games. So what does that mean for Rutgers this weekend? Is Rutgers on this Thanksgiving weekend going to end up 6-6 or 7-5? What is the prediction? I am going to predict Michigan State gets the victory here. I think Rutgers has been decimated by injuries. I think the loss to Illinois was a heartbreaker. I think it's going to be tough playing on the road in East Lansing. And I think Michigan State comes out with a 27-20 victory to put Rutgers 6-6 on the season. And in future shows, after the season is over, we hope to have Coach Schiano on the show. We're going to discuss recruiting and the future of Rutgers football. So that wraps up the discussion of Rutgers and Michigan State. Much shorter show tonight because there's not really much to discuss. We saw what happened on the field last Saturday, and every Rutgers fan is not happy about it, nor should they be. And I don't know how many times I have to say it until I'm blue in the face, but number one, you have to buy players through the transfer portal. Buy those SEC players that aren't starting and are pissed off about it. Buy high school recruits. Number two, create a national championship culture where the expectations are to win championships and be in the playoff every year, not to simply be in a bowl. Refuse to accept mediocrity. And number 3, embrace a culture of development where the players know they're going to come to Rutgers, they're going to win, they're going to make money, and they're going to have a future in the NFL, and they're going to have a future in life because of what they've learned and experienced at Rutgers. But I do think Rutgers ends up 6-6, goes to a bowl game. I predict they will probably win the bowl game and go to 7-6 on the season, and then that will lead us into a discussion of their recruiting and their future. All right, so apart from that, at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight, the College Football Playoff Committee comes out with its most recent rankings after a weekend of absolute chaos in college football. Now, I have been critical of the rankings and in some cases of the committee members for being too bureaucratic, having too myopic of a focus, and not really looking at how these teams are playing on the team to determine what everybody should want to determine. Who are the best 12 teams? Okay? And the best 12 teams is not determined solely by their record. Okay? The fact that a team may have 1 loss, 2 losses, 3 losses, or even 4 losses does not tell the whole story. And the reason that it doesn't tell the whole story is because of the extraordinary disparity in schedule strength. Teams with much harder schedules, like a South Carolina, for example, are like a Georgia, who had 2 losses at this point. They may still be better than an undefeated team in the Big 12. They may still be better than an undefeated team in the ACC. Looking at record alone and drawing an arbitrary line of demarcation based on wins and losses is not going to lead you to include the best 12 teams in the college football playoffs. It's simply going to lead to the teams that you may think are most deserving. But most deserving does not mean the best, and most deserving is subjective because it's based on a metric, wins and losses, that does not take into account the fact that some teams play a much harder schedule than others. Okay? For example, if Florida, which is, I believe, 6-5, played in the Big 12, would they have 5 losses? No. If Boise State played in the Big 10 or the SEC, would Boise State be undefeated? No. And that, in a nutshell, is the point and the problem with relying on record solely as a determinant of where you should be ranked and whether you should be in a playoff. If your goal is to really get the best 12 teams, you have to look beyond record to schedules, rosters, margins of victory, margins of losses, intangible qualities. Because if you consider the NFL, for example, in 2007, you had a 6-loss New York Giants team get selected as a wild card. And what did the New York Giants do in 2007? They beat an undefeated New England Patriots team in the Super Bowl. So a 6-loss team beat a 15-0 team. And again, that is the point and the problem with simply relying upon record, because you're depriving teams that, because of harder schedules, who nonetheless may be better than teams with better records but weaker schedules, of an opportunity to compete in the playoff so that we can truly determine the best team. If you don't take a nuanced approach to who the 12 best teams are, then you have a very simplistic answer to whether the college football playoff is legitimate, and the answer to that is no. So I'm going to give you my top 12, which I'm sure will differ from the committee's top 12, but I think reflect the philosophy that I just discussed. So who are the top 12? We're about 1 hour and 41 minutes from the official playoff rankings. So here's an appropriate time to give you what I think are the real top 12 teams. Number one. When I was going to law school, I don't know why, but I just fell in love with Ohio State. I liked Columbus. I liked the short north. I liked the horseshoe, and I liked that German restaurant where it was all you can eat and filled with nice people in a beautiful area of Columbus. Despite the freezing cold winters, I'm still going to take Ohio State at number 1. They defeated an Indiana team that was 10-0, 38-15. Now, they didn't completely dominate as the score indicates. It was reasonably close for about a quarter and a half until Indiana started shooting itself in the foot, such as when the punter decided to drop the ball and give Ohio State field position inside the 5-yard line. But the truth of the matter is Ohio State has a great roster and a great defense. Ohio State is number 1. Number 2, summers are extremely hot in Texas, and the entire state of Texas must have been very disappointed after that beatdown by the Bulldogs of Georgia. But Texas has rebounded. Texas has a great roster, a roster of elite players. They've got an experienced quarterback in Quinn Ewers. They have a great wide receiving core, and they have a great head coach in Steve Sarkisian, who can offensively, his schemes are brilliant and will challenge any defense, including Ohio State. Texas at number 2. Number 3. I love animals, but I'm not a huge fan of ducks. However, these ducks are worth a mention. The Oregon Ducks at number 3. A lot of people have Oregon at number 1. I suspect the committee will have Oregon at number 1. Why do I not have Oregon at number 1? Well, I will explain that to you very simply. Because Oregon has not had a schedule that justifies it being number 1. They have only one quality win on the road, and I wouldn't even necessarily call that a quality win because it was over the Wisconsin Badgers and it was only by 3 points at Camp Randall. Other than that, Oregon has had an easy schedule. They did play Ohio State at home in Autzen Stadium, winning 32-31. Had Will Howard slid just 2 seconds or even 1 second earlier, Ohio State kicks the field goal and wins. Yes, Oregon is very good. But do I believe Oregon is going to win the national title? No. And it goes back to my argument. Strength of schedule should matter, not just record. Number 4, as a perfect example of this, it's been a roller coaster of a ride for those folks in Athens, Georgia. Carson Beck has shown flashes of greatness and flashes of nothingness. Very inconsistent, but that Georgia Bulldogs team is getting healthy. They had several injuries on the defensive side earlier in the year, but the healthier they get, the better they are. Georgia seems to be coming together at the right time and is in that elite group of teams that's going to challenge for the national championship. 5, as an alumni of the University of Southern California, it pains me to say this because I was never a huge fan of the state of Indiana and not the town or city of South Bend, but the Notre Dame Fighting Irish get the nod here at number 5, mostly due to the chaos that happened this last weekend. So it's more like number 5 by default. But Notre Dame started off the season with a lot of expectations to contend for a national title, only to be humiliated in South Bend by Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois, which has not itself gone on to have a successful season. At that point, everybody wrote off Notre Dame. But Notre Dame, in part due to a fairly easy schedule, has won every game since, and Notre Dame this year has a defense, and they have 2 really solid running backs. They are a very good team. They're going to be tough to beat. They're going to be a legitimate playoff contender. They come in number 5. Number 6, and I'm surprised I'm putting this team at number 6, but I remember back in the mid-'80s, they called it the Pony Express at Southern Methodist University. Craig James, great running back for SMU. Then SMU gets the death penalty for recruiting and other violations and becomes irrelevant in college football for years. And now SMU has come back from the grave and is a legitimate team. Good defense, balanced offense. SMU is legit. SMU is for real. SMU is 6. Number 7. One of the things I always hated about the University of Tennessee's campus were the steps. You have to keep walking up steps to get anywhere. I find it to be annoying. But I don't find this team to be annoying. I find this team to be very promising. Tennessee Volunteers, they have a defense this year. They have a great running back. They have great wideouts. They have a freshman quarterback, though, that may not be able to get the job done. But it's too early to write off Tennessee. Tennessee comes in at number 7. Number 8, a familiar face, a face that I don't particularly like, but they are going to be in the rankings because we have to rank 12 teams, and as such, we have to put teams in there that may not otherwise be contending for the national championship. That's why I don't believe a 12-team playoff is ideal, but no one listens to me. When Penn State played Ohio State in Unhappy Valley, Ohio State spotted them 10 points. It was 10-0 Penn State. From that point on, in the first quarter, throughout the rest of the game, Penn State scored 3 points. Ohio State comes back for the victory, 20-13. What that game showed was the good and the bad of Penn State. Great defense, incredibly disciplined, well coached on the defensive side, but a fairly anemic offense that really is not going to score enough points against any of these elite teams to compete for the national championship. Penn State is ranked number 8, reluctantly. Number 9, one of the problems I have with teams, or one of the things about teams that I dislike, shall I say, are those teams that think that offense wins everything and that there's no need to have a defense. I'm not sure why the University of Miami is even fielding a defense because the players that they trot out there don't play any defense. Nonetheless, Cam Ward is a fantastic quarterback, a Heisman contender, and that Miami offense is dynamic. Could things come together for Miami such that they compete for a national championship? Well, I guess anything's possible. But with that defense, I doubt it. Miami comes in at number 9. Number 10, the most controversial pick, goes back to my philosophy. You can't just look at wins and losses. You have to look at schedule disparity, rosters, margins of victory, injuries on a team. Remember Florida State last year? So, there's a lot of commentators who are perfectly fine with putting a 2-loss team in the playoffs, but then when you mention 3 losses, they go into complete apoplexy, into this mania, into this uncontrolled rage. A 3-loss team, forget it. Well, what the hell is the difference between a 2-loss team and a 3-loss team if the 3-loss team has played an incredibly more difficult schedule, and if the team has defeated ranked teams and, most importantly, consistently improved throughout the year? That's one of the issues I have with this. Let's look at the body of work of a team and how they perform during the course of a season. Well, it depends on how you define the course of a season. Do you define it as emphasizing the upward trajectory of a team? Or do you place emphasis on losses that happened in August or September? I don't. I look at who the best teams are now. And to look at the best teams, you have to look beyond records. You have to look at schedule strength. You have to look at margin of victory. You have to look at improvement. Okay? You have to look at where are these teams now, not where were they then. In that spirit, number 10, the Gamecocks of South Carolina. If South Carolina wins on the road against Clemson on Saturday, which is also my mother's 83rd birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. South Carolina is in the playoffs. And for all of you people who say you're crazy to put a 3-loss team in there, tell it to the Giants in 2007 who had 6 losses. Tell it to any wild card team like the Yankees in 1996 who went on to win against the Braves and win the World Series. Get lost. All right? Enough is enough out of you. You're okay with a 2-loss team. Oh, but a 3-loss team is a crime against humanity. You're okay with Ohio State having a cupcake schedule But the fact that Georgia had a murderous schedule means nothing to you. Get lost. South Carolina should be in the playoffs. Number 10. Number 11. One of my top favorite sports movies is Hoosiers. Gene Hackman was fantastic in that movie. The Indiana Hoosiers are a legitimate team this year, and their one loss against Ohio State is not going to disabuse me of the notion that they should be a playoff team. And they will be a playoff team if they win their final game. Indiana has a great coach in Kurt Signetti. They have a very disciplined team. They have a strong defense, and they have a legitimate offense. Indiana is going to sneak into the playoffs, and don't write Indiana off just yet, just like you shouldn't write South Carolina off just yet. Now, number 12. I really was tempted to make what would have been the most controversial choice probably since these rankings have began, but I resisted, and I'm going to say, okay, I'll go the conventional route. Number 12, although I've been to Montana, I've never been to Idaho, but Boise State with that beautiful blue turf in Boise State, number 12. Is Boise State a good team? Yes. Do I believe they're one of the top 12 teams? Probably not. But we're in an era of a 12-team playoff where, in my view, teams 8 through 12 are probably not even going to be considered remotely likely to win the national championship or get past the first round. But it's number 12, so you have to pick somebody. But my instinct tells me that there should be another team that we should consider, and that is a team from Gainesville, Florida. You're damn right, the Florida Gators. Oh, they have 5 losses. Yes, I know. I'm crazy. I make no sense. I see it I see it often by other commentators. Okay, well, Florida just beat an Ole Miss team that throttled Georgia. Florida has had the hardest schedule in the country, arguably, all year. And Florida is on a roll. The Florida team right now is one of the best 12 teams in the country. And if you disagree with that, then your disagreement must be based on wins and losses only. But if wins and losses were oh so important, why are you okay with a 2-loss Georgia team being in there? Probably because you would say their schedule was difficult. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't rely on a team's record to shut them out and then excuse another team's 2 losses to keep them in because you're considering a factor, namely schedule strength disparity, that you refuse to consider in the former instance. You got to be consistent across the board. Florida is one of the best 12 teams. And after this weekend, I think I may take that next step and say Florida should be in the playoff. But for now, I'm going to give the nod to Boise State. Now, where will these rankings match up with the committee's rankings? I suspect it will be vastly different because, in my view, the committee is filled with bureaucrats who want to make safe choices, who want to make non-controversial choices, who want to make weak choices. And as such, you will not get the top 12 teams. You will instead get the top 12 politically correct teams. And that, in my view, is a mistake. I mean, if we were going to if the decision to expand the playoff from 4 teams to 12 teams had any justification, the justification would have been that we can't do or make the mistake of doing what we did with the 4-team playoff, which was to have this horrible controversy about who should be 4 or 5. And I've always advocated that the solution to that was to have a play-in game for the 4th spot so we wouldn't have this battle. And because 4 teams was enough because teams after that were so unlikely to compete for a national title. But no, the committee had to go to 12 teams. Okay, so it's gone to 12 teams, but if it's going to use the same metrics that it used to put TCU, for example, a team that lost 65 to Georgia in the national championship game in, then we're going to have the same philosophical problem and the same practical problem that we have with the 4-team playoff. Doesn't make any sense. The best teams deserve to be in, and record is not dispositive. Best solution would have been to have a play-in for the 4th spot, but the committee decided to go a different route, and in my view, as I predict, we'll make the same mistakes again. We'll see what those rankings look like at 8 p.m. Eastern time. But thanks so much for being here. If you've liked the show, please hit that like button and subscribe button. And I welcome certainly your comments. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Go Scarlet Knights.